Hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 13 of the eFootball podcast. As it's the last episode of the season, it's quite fitting that I have the same guests as the first one. So again, I'm joined by James McCarthy. James, how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm sad that it's the last one of the season, but it's been a good first year, and hopefully we can end it in fitting style.
It's been a fantastic late season run, hasn't it? So I'm sure we'll get a contract into the second season, but we won't count our chickens just yet. But also joining us is Rob Tonkinson, and Rob must be absolutely delighted with events not only just the weekend but of the last few hours as this goes to recording. So Rob, I don't want to presume you're doing well, but I guess you are. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, episode 13 to correlate with Arsenal's 13th FA Cup win at the weekend.
Oh, there you go.
It's an early mention.
He's getting it in early. But yeah, I mean, what a perfect place to start then, the FA Cup final. I was being a bit flippant last week, saying I wasn't going to watch it, but I did actually take the time to watch it in the end, slightly begrudgingly. But I guess Arsenal have to be given their due because they were deserved winners. James, I think it's fair to say that Chelsea deserved winning the league, but they certainly didn't deserve to come out on top on Saturday. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a bit of a weird one. Chelsea have managed to blow teams away this season with their absolutely brilliant football and strolled to the Premier League in the end. I think it was just a case of Arsenal really showing up on the day. I think Chelsea weren't necessarily that bad, but they certainly found it a bit difficult to break down Arsenal's system. And Arsenal really, as horrible as it is for me to say, they really did turn up on the day, and they did deserve it. Their big game players did show up. The Sanchez and the Rosals, who are the culprits when things go wrong a lot of the time because they're not pulling their weight or they're not being the world class players that we know them to be. They showed up and. It's not great to see either of those teams winning a trophy for me as a Spurs fan, but yeah, I suppose we have to begrudgingly say congratulations to Arsenal.
Rob, what exactly did Arsenal get right then? Because we always talk about in a two-horse race in a cup final that the underdog, for use of a better term, has always got a chance. But what did Arsenal manage to do to foil Chelsea and stop their perfect season of a double?
I think it was the fast start that really did it for them on Saturday. I think Chelsea, with the weakened team, especially in the back three, with Holding who's quite young, you've got Monreal who's not a natural centre-back, and Mertesacker starting his first game. I think Chelsea thought, oh, it's all right, Arsenal, they'll come in, they'll have possession for the first 10 minutes, and we'll just grow into the game, and eventually when we put that back three into pressure, the goals will come. And it was sort of that complacency, I think, that did Chelsea over on Saturday, because Arsenal started so quickly. And, yeah, in the first 5 minutes got a very fortunate goal. I mean, I'd be very annoyed if I was a Chelsea fan and that was being scored against me. But at the end of the day, I don't really care that much. But, I mean, that seemed to just give Arsenal all the confidence they needed on Saturday, the opening goal in the first 5 minutes. And I think once the team had a lead to defend, they just seemed to grow in confidence throughout the rest of the first half, and really, had Arsenal been 3 up at the end of the first half, I don't think anyone really could have begrudged them that, because they were just so excellent. And if it wasn't for Gary Cahill and Thibaut Courtois, I mean, it could have been all over by half time, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Arsenal were dominant from the off. You're right though, the opening was incredibly contentious. James, I mean, how much of that is good fortune and how much of that is a bad refereeing decision? Perhaps for the offside call, and also Sanchez's near sort of basketball layup in the setup for the opener. Yeah,
I think that certainly was a pretty poor refereeing decision for me. I think whether you're looking through rose-tinted glasses or not, it was certainly a handball. The argument that his arms are in a natural position is all over the place because his arms are up in the air. You could maybe say that he's trying to protect his face, but at the end of the day, you're a footballer. If you're going to get hit in the face with the ball, you should be pretty used to it. You duck your head and header it instead. I think it's definitely a handball, and considering that incident has led to a goal, it's really not good enough, not good refereeing at all. Especially when you consider he was only 5 yards away from it. He definitely saw it. But then again, we've seen it over and over again. The referee only gets a split second to see it, and I'm sure he'd probably agree if he watched it back again now that he should have blown it for handball, and that first goal shouldn't have counted.
Rob, if we take away that first goal, is that just a sort of mere blip in Arsenal's sort of game plan? Do you think they still would have been dominant enough to go and win the game, or is that the way that goal is scored and the early start and the momentum that gives Arsenal, does that change the landscape completely?
They may not have had to have played so much on the counter, because I think from the first goal they were still dominant, but in the sense of having all the possession, it was very much coming and countering off Chelsea trying to create something at the other end. But I still think the way they started that game, had they disallowed that, probably in a couple of minutes later, they would have been up the other end scoring anyway, unless there was going to be the combination of Cahill and Courtois to stop them as they did throughout the rest of the first half. I think it was contentious, but at the same time, when you look at the way that the first half flowed, it was coming, regardless of whether it was going to come in the 5th minute or later on in that first half.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough point to make, actually. I mean, Chelsea just weren't really at the races. I don't know if they perhaps looked at the cup final and said, it's not that they didn't want it, but perhaps Arsenal needed it more. Whether, they were on the beach, I don't know if that's a fair sort of statement to make, but they just weren't quite the Chelsea that we've seen throughout the season, the sort of dominance and the relentlessness they've been in the Premier League. Perhaps it's one game too many, James, do you not think?
Yeah, I think the argument that Chelsea were really on the beach is a good one, really. I think maybe they had a bit of a hangover from the Premier League winning celebrations, and I think really you've got to look at Arsenal a bit more. I think Arsenal really needed this win because, as you've seen in the reaction throughout social media, throughout the world, is that Arsenal were in a really bad place as a club, and then this has kind of lifted them a little bit. You've got fans who are arguing that even though they have had a largely absolutely shocking season, that you can see them arguing that they've had a better season than the likes of Tottenham and Man City because they've ended up with a trophy, whether they be out of the top 4 or not. So it really was more of an important game for Arsenal than it was for Chelsea. If Chelsea won that, it's just another trophy for their cabinet. It's a trophy they've won loads of times before, and it's no biggie really. No one would have batted an eyelid. But for Arsenal to go ahead and win this, it's completely changed their season. It's completely changed their outlook of the last year and probably the next few years to come. Because, as you can see, in my opinion, that FA Cup win is what allowed Arsene Wenger to sign that new 2-year contract, which is, as you rightly say, has only just happened in the last few hours for us recording. Yeah,
that's something we're certainly going to touch on in a few minutes' time. I just want to bring up a few more points of the cup final itself. Rob, per Mertesacker, he must get credit for his performance. The fact that he's sort of come in and been away from the first team for so long. Is there a case to be made for him playing in a back 3 and the fact that he can perhaps not have to worry about doing the dirty work? Because in a back 3 he's got 2 other defenders, one either side, who can pick apart the sort of possession, and he can sort of just deal with the simple bits and not have to have the same kind of game that he would play in a flat back 4. Is that a formation that played to his strengths on Saturday?
Yeah, he was absolutely sensational on Saturday. That is certainly his best performance in an Arsenal shirt. And it was surprising to hear that he'd never played before in a back 3, because it seems like a formation that would be very much suited to a player that isn't the most mobile when they'd be in a back 4. I'm surprised, to be honest. He was injured, I think, until about February this year, which was around the time that Mustafi had come back from injury and started to struggle with his form. Mustafi was excellent when he first came into the team, although saying that, he was following a 4-3 defeat against Liverpool in the opening day of the season, so it's not too hard to be better than what we'd put out on the first day. But, Mertesacker was sensational, and it really does beg the question, why on earth, when Mustafi was struggling so much before the 3-4-3 formation change around the start of April, why Mertesacker wasn't brought into the team if he can give performances like that, especially if he's been fit since February.
That is true, but I guess there's almost I wouldn't say an embarrassment of riches, but he certainly had personnel to call upon. I think Mertesacker's always been at the bottom of the list, and perhaps through necessity on Saturday that he had to play, but he certainly made a case for playing again next season with the performance he did against Chelsea. Fair play to him. Almost sort of Ledley King-esque. People used to talk about Ledley King saying he never used to train in the week and have these fantastic performances and almost sort of superhuman, but perhaps wouldn't go that far, Mertesacker, but he certainly, didn't look like a 36-year-old who's coming towards the end of his career. He looked incredibly evergreen. James, in terms of Chelsea, I think the only real sort of flashpoint was Victor Moses sending off. Some could say that he didn't dive in the semi-final, but he certainly won a penalty after Son's recklessness, but he sort of learnt the hard way that you can't get away with it all the time after the bookable offence after that silly dive, really, wasn't it? He's only got himself to blame for that.
Yeah, definitely. I personally think that the what happened in the semi-final was a dive. It was it was a reckless challenge from Son, but all he's got to do is lift his leg and get over it. And I think it might not be a dive, but it's certainly bending the rules. I don't want to say cheating, but in terms of his first yellow card, completely fair enough. Take one for the team. One of those cynical tackles that he had to make, otherwise Arsenal were on a break. And then that second one really is embarrassing, and embarrassing is the only word that you can use for it, because it really was pathetic the way that he went down, and hopefully we'll see a bit of retrospective punishment. I've always said that I think players who do go down too easily, or do go down in Moses' case without even being touched, do need to be punished retrospectively. Otherwise, we are going to keep on seeing this happening throughout the season. Otherwise, players are just going to keep on doing it, because we spoke before about Leroy Sané and Marcus Rashford getting away with it, winning penalties, and until they are punished retrospectively, they're going to keep on doing it. But no, as I say, Victor Moses, he'll hang his head, he'll kick himself that he missed out on the chance to play a full FA Cup final because of his stupidity, and I'd be surprised if you see him diving again now, because he really did. He ruined the day for himself, and I'm sure it's one of the biggest games that he's ever played in. And yeah, totally embarrassing, and the right decision by the referee.
I think also for Moses, it's such a poor end for a great season, really, because no one really expected him to come back into the Chelsea fold after so many loan spells away. I mean, the amount of Premier League clubs he's been at, I mean, it's a stupendous list, really. But to come back into the fold under Antonio Conte did raise a lot of eyebrows at the start of the season, but he went from strength to strength. And for him, like you say, it's going to have to be a sour note for his season to end. I think he'll get lucky with the fact these diving rules aren't going to come into place till next season, so I don't think they're going to retrospectively cast it back as far as May. So he'll just escape sort of punishment from that point of view. But yeah, it's a poor end to his season. It's a poor end to Chelsea's season, but it's a good end to Arsene Wenger's season. So Rob, as the resident Arsenal fan this week, what's your take? Are you Wenger in, Wenger out? Are you happy? Are you frustrated? Let us know.
Christ, this could be a very long one. I'd like to think that I've stayed in the Wenger in category for as long as I could, and it was probably February of last season when we lost at Old Trafford that I was very much like, right, he's taken this team as far as he can, and it really is time to move on. I'm not one of these people that's like fly a plane over the stadium and absolutely go on at him on social media. I mean, some of the things said about him are disgraceful, because it seems people are too quick to forget how great those first 10 years before we moved to the Emirates actually were under Arsene Wenger. And I mean, I'm only 23, so Arsene Wenger is the only manager I've ever known. I didn't know the George Graham era or further back than that. So for me, yeah, I only know Arsene Wenger in the Arsenal technical area, so perhaps it is easier to say these things. But I think now, after Saturday was the perfect mandate for me, for him to move on. I didn't expect him to leave, although there were some murmurings that some of the language he'd used at the end of the final day of the season when Arsenal didn't qualify for the Champions League, some of the way he'd been speaking in the lead up to the Cup final as well. It was it almost seemed like it was the end of an era. I think the reason, however, he's not gone and he has stayed for another 2 years, it's not really based on any merit anyway. I think it's just a complete lack of preparation for the future from the club. I don't think there were, in the same way that there was a preparation at Man United for Ferguson retiring, in which Moyes was pretty much announced a day, maybe even hours after Ferguson had announced his retirement. I don't think the next plans were in place for if Wenger turned around on Saturday or Monday or whenever he had this meeting with Kroenke and said, I'm not staying, that's it. I'm at the end of my contract. I've completed my contract as I always do, and I'm going to move on and probably wait for the France job at the end of the next World Cup. I think the fact that the club haven't seemed to make any contact with any managers that may be available. There's been many managerial merry-go-rounds in the last few years, and Arsenal have missed the boat on all of them. Guardiola's gone to City, Klopp's gone to Liverpool, Pochettino's gone to Spurs. All the people that potentially could have replaced him have seemed to have gone rather than possibly Thomas Tuchel, who's also left Dortmund today. But there really isn't anyone, and I think that is why he stayed. I honestly think that had there been a plan in place, and had director of football had been brought in, perhaps some other people on the board, perhaps some more people in other departments that Arsene Wenger worked so closely in, and been brought in throughout the season, it would have been a much easier transition. Due to the fact that there hasn't been those appointments made, and there hasn't been what seems to be trying to get a new coach in either. I think they've just had to keep him. If they got rid of him today, the club would be in a complete meltdown, to be honest with you. The two best players at the club are at the end of their contracts at the end of the year, and you're going to have to try and bring in a new coach and a new structure to try and keep those players. You're potentially going to lose them in one summer, and it would just be too disastrous. The only way they'd probably have any chance of keeping Ozil and Sanchez is to have someone like Wenger around who brought those players in and can probably work his hardest to keep them there. So personally, I would like to have heard that there was a new manager coming in, whether it be Tuchel or Allegri or Simeone, who was my personal choice, or Jardim at Monaco is another one that perhaps might have been linked to us. I'm content enough that keeping Wenger for another 2 years is probably the right idea right now, because there just isn't. It's not the right time for a transition. But these 2 years can't be left in limbo of Arsene Wenger gets complete control over the club top to bottom, who gets brought in and everything. There has to be that transition now, that this is the final contract. Because, the way it's going, he might not see out these 2 years, because if Arsenal aren't challenging for the league title within these 2 years, the unrest is not going to go away anytime soon. And it's a bit scary, but hopefully keeping the consistency of Arsene Wenger, hopefully it will just be a smooth transition. But the club have to really influence and put some things in place, because I can't see this going on and on and on. This is going to be a 2 year transition now to the next phase of Arsenal Football Club.
That's a very good point you make there, Rob. It does lead me to sort of ask the question to you, James. Did it also almost come to the point where the cup final result, in a sense, was irrelevant because of the fact that they had no one really lined up, that Wenger was almost going to be Arsenal manager by default? Is that something that you buy into, or do you have a different theory?
No, that theory was always my theory from the start. I've said for a long time I thought Wenger was going to sign the 2 year contract because the kind of the high profile target that Arsenal are looking at to bring in, as Rob says, your Allegri's and your Simeone's, none of them are really available. I don't think Thomas Tuchel was ever the kind of bloke that Arsenal were going to bring in. It was always going to be one of these high profile names, and so the fact that neither of these blokes, for me, those two are the two front runners. Allegri is the man who's been mentioned probably the most in terms of who Arsenal fans want and who they should be looking at as a top club. The fact that those two aren't readily available, it's right. It's getting rid of Wenger would have been for the sake of it, and it would have been a risky move to get rid of Wenger without a viable target to come in. What Rob says about the 2 year transition thing, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. That it is a 2 year contract extension, but it needs to be that this is the last 2 years now, and so you're right in saying that this needs to be the transitional period, the kind of handover 2 years. I suppose it's kind of testament to Wenger in that they've had some respect for him. They haven't just said you're out of the top four for 1 year, and so therefore you've lost your job. They've given him, I think, and that would have been said in the board meetings, that this is the last 2 years now, and if unless of course, as you say, if Arsenal continue on this downward spiral, then I think they'll have to get rid of him sooner than that. But I think it's clever because if they, as you say, as you rightly say, if they get rid of him after the cup final, yeah, it's a fitting end. They've gone out on a high, but then you're looking at each other thinking, well, who's going to take this club on? Who's going to take this club further than it has already? And there isn't anyone out there at the moment on that level. And the people who are readily available, they're not on the level that Arsenal want to bring into the club. So I think it's the right decision. Yeah, you're right in saying that it's a stable decision. The fans will probably accept it in the end, but I think it all relies on what happens during this summer transfer window and probably towards the first half of next season.
Rob, do you reckon that Wenger kept quiet for so long because he was in such a position of strength? Like, because Arsenal weren't lining up anyone new, he didn't feel he had to sort of play his cards so early?
Say that again, sorry. It's sort of cut out a little bit.
Sorry, I was saying, do you reckon that Wenger kept quiet for so long because he was in a position of strength where, because the club weren't lining up a new manager, it almost was unnecessary for him to sort of lay his cards on the table so early?
I don't know. I think that's more his style, to be honest. He's never really been someone that is very open with his contract negotiations. He has a stance, which is he always wants to stay at the club. And I think that the board knew that throughout. And to be honest, he has that stance that he always wants to stay on and he doesn't want to go anywhere. And I think it's probably just because he might be looking around now thinking, oh God, is there actually a club team? You know, he's been coming out recently and saying, well, I could have gone to all these teams like Real Madrid and Barcelona who have been after me for so long and I stayed here because I'm loyal to Arsenal Football Club. Well, those clubs probably aren't looking at him now because they're probably looking at him thinking, well, are you a bit washed up? You're like nearly 70 and you haven't challenged for the league title much in the last 13 years. You know, you're sort of and you haven't challenged for the Champions League in 10 years. You know, so perhaps that is his stance now, that I am forever loyal to Arsenal Football Club because my chance to go to that next level of clubs is gone. And so I'm here and I will try to make the most of it and hopefully put Arsenal back onto that level which they were at around 2004. But I don't think it was a power play or anything to keep quiet. I mean, the board themselves, you know, if they had a problem, they need to speak out and they never did. I think for them, it was unquestionable that they were going to offer him a new contract. And I think perhaps a new contract has probably been agreed for a long time. And possibly there were murmurings that not finishing in the top four might change that. But I very much doubt that there hasn't been this perhaps gentleman's agreement that there was going to be another 2 years because they haven't looked at anyone else, really.
I guess if he was always going to be offered a new contract, that there was no point giving him a year because that's just that halfway house where even that doesn't really give you enough time for transition. So I think this sort of 2-year cycle that we've sort of intimated that will probably be the last is the best fit for the club and for Wenger and for whoever takes over. James, they've done one bit of important business, but the next bit is obviously trying to keep hold of Mesut Ozil and Alexis Sanchez. With Wenger now committing his future, is that going to make the job easier, or are these two contract rebels still going to be wanting away in the transfer window?
I think ultimately at the end of the day, it might not be any of their choices. To be honest, I think if Arsenal want to keep hold of them, I think they will keep hold of them, but at risk of disrupting the squad, I think they will keep hold of them. If Arsenal decide to cut their losses on a couple of contract rebels, then yeah, they might let them go. I think the one that is obviously most likely to leave is Alexis Sanchez, and the rumours that he could be off to Man City, I think, are a little bit flawed. I think rivals selling to rival clubs, and when I say rivals, I mean rivals in terms of the title charge rather than local rivals. But you know, I think it's just something that clubs don't want to do because you know you just got to think about how stupid you'll look if Alexis Sanchez goes and bangs in a hat trick against you next season, having sold him for it'd be around 50 million. You'd say, you know, is it really worth that 50 million pounds? Because Arsenal will be half the side without him, and 50 million pounds. Who are you going to buy of that quality from the rest of Europe? I think I always think of Modric at Tottenham when he was on the knocking on the door of Chelsea. And no matter what Chelsea offered, I just think at the time there was no way we were going to sell to a rival, and there was no way we were going to further strengthen a team who we're looking to be in a similar position of. And I think if Arsenal did sell to a close rival, it'd really show just that the ambition of the club failing completely, because you know Arsenal want to be in the same place as Man City, and if they're selling their best player to them for no matter what sum of money, then it really shows that ambition isn't there. And I think it'd be quite frankly a terrible idea. So personally, I think both of them will sign contracts in the end. They'll probably have to shell out a bit more money for them to get them to stay. But yeah, it is my opinion that they'll be at Arsenal Football Club next season, and I think they'll probably make a few signings as well.
I think you're absolutely right in the sense that if Arsenal do have ambitions, certainly to return to the Champions League, then they're going to want to keep hold of their best players. They're certainly not going to want to make their rival stronger. And if they do that, they're then going to sort of drop down a bracket and be sort of looking over their shoulder to 6s and 7s all the time. So it is a key summer for them. You touched on City. We'll cover them in a bit with their transfer activity because they seem to be leading the race in the transfer window at the moment. But I'm just going to do the social media bit. So, as per usual, if you want to follow us on Twitter and Instagram, it's at @e_footballnet. If you want to follow us on Facebook, it's facebook.com/efootballpage. If you want to check out the website, it's www.efootballonline.com. If you've got any questions for the show for next season or even over the summer, I can always answer them. It's at DanTracy1983 or it's also at @e_footballnet. That's the social media bits. We'll be back after this very short break. Good evening, welcome back. That's the first half of the show out of the way. It's a lot of Arsenal, but that's where the news is, so I'll make no apologies for that. Managerial changes have been afoot this week, and there's no different at Watford. They've got rid of Walter Matsari. They've got in Marco Silva. Rob, how good of an appointment will that be come next season?
I think it's quite exciting. Watford they're a bit weird because they got rid of Jukanovic when they got up and got Sanchez Flores in, got rid of him after he got to an FA Cup semi-final, and then they got Matsari, who kept them up, and now they're going for Marco Silva. At some point this bubble is going to burst. You cannot go and get a new manager every season and it carries on because enough clubs will tell you, eventually you get a duff one and you end up going down. But Marco Silva, I think, has been a good appointment for them. He's someone that so nearly kept Hull up, who really had no right to be anywhere close to staying up, with all due respect to them. They probably should have been down there with Sunderland and Middlesbrough relegated well before the end of the season. And he, one bad result against Sunderland, that if that doesn't happen, they're probably up and Swansea are down or even Palace. I think when I was last on here, I was pretty optimistic that they were going to stay up, which has obviously been proven quite wrong. But I think it's a good appointment for them. He's someone that across the league was being linked to a few clubs. I think Southampton fans were quite hopeful they might get him. Same with Palace as well. So Watford fans can probably be quite optimistic about him. He's got a half-decent record. He won the Greek League with Olympiacos, which I'm sure isn't that hard to do really, but it's still a league title. And I think he won the Portuguese Cup with Sporting while he was there as well, and was being linked with a move back to Portugal with Porto. So he can't be that bad.
No, not at all. James, I guess Watford had to act quickly for the reasons Rob said, but also surely they've got to sort of have a manager that stays on for more than the season. Like Rob touches that, it's all very well you have this sort of short-term cycle, but if they really want to get somewhere, they've really got to sort of back the manager more than sort of short-term, certainly in the medium term and onwards.
Yeah, it's what I said when we first talked about the managerial situation at Watford, is that whoever they bring in, or whether it was Matsari that was going to stay, they need to back them and give them a bit of money and sign the players that they want to sign, and so that Watford Football Club is theirs and theirs alone. And so with it being Marco Silva, I think that point is reinforced even more, because if Marco Silva had the entire season with Hull, he probably maybe would have kept them up, because their form without him was a hell of a lot worse than their form with him. Without looking at that last result against Tottenham, I think it wasn't the worst end to the season. There was times where we were talking about how they were going to do the Great Escape. Marco Silva was going to keep them up. And so with Watford, I think they definitely need to give someone like Marco Silva the full control. Really, they need to give him the club, and they need to let him work his magic with it, because he clearly is a top class manager. He's won titles in Portugal, here, there, and everywhere. And I think he really is the kind of guy that could probably transform Watford into a bit more than what they are now. I'm not saying that they're going to be knocking on the door of the Champions League anytime soon, but it's not. When you think of Watford, you think of probably not even mid-table. You think of below to in between the Champions League, in between the relegation zone and mid-table, kind of below mediocrity. It's a place that you want to go and pick up 3 points for sure. He can definitely transform them into a mid-table side, as definitely a more stable side. But as I say, as long as he gets the backing and as long as he gets the support.
Yep, that's certainly true. I think they do have to sort of back him in the transfer market and just long-term in terms of a season. He's a good manager. He's a young manager, and I think Watford have landed on their feet here. They've got rid of Matt Sarri, rightly or wrongly. That's done now, but they've beaten the Acura teams, and I think they'll be silly if they just discard him after 12 months, because I don't think they're going to sort of keep striking lucky over the course of the season. So I think, if they can sort of make headway over the next few years, it'll be exciting as to where Watford end up. It's all change in Europe. It's a number of managerial ins and outs. Ernesto Valverde is manager of Barcelona. That's no real surprise, because that's been the bookies' favourite for a long while now. He left Bilbao a week or so ago, so it was more of a formality. Luciano Spalletti has left Roma. He quit earlier today, Tuesday, after finishing second in Serie A. That wasn't seemed to be good enough, because he wasn't playing Totti enough in his last season. Even in his last game, Totti had to make do just a subs appearance in their final 3-2 win over Genoa. And as we touched on earlier, Thomas Tuchel was left Dortmund. Some reports saying sacked, some are saying a sort of less than amicable split. But Rob, I mean, some people putting 2 and 2 together, getting 5, and assuming that Tuchel was going to be Arsenal's manager earlier today. That didn't obviously come to fruition. But there are some managerial vacancies still available in the Premier League. Could you see him coming over to England over the course of the summer?
I don't know, unless someone... I mean, I don't think any of the top clubs are about to sack their manager, so unless someone mid-table is about to make a very cool splash, because Tuchel was obviously being very much talked up. I mean, I think he's only won the German Cup with Dortmund, but very much being talked up at one point as the next Jurgen Klopp. So I think he's quite well regarded in a lot of camps. I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if I think Southampton fans have been saying that Puel might not last until the next season. So it wouldn't shock me so much, perhaps, if a club like Southampton would suddenly end up with Tuchel as manager. But I don't know. Tuchel sort of strikes me. He might. This is just gut feeling. This isn't based on anything at all. But perhaps we'll be looking and thinking maybe to hold out until one of those bigger jobs in England possibly becomes available in the future.